You're just going to once again wrap this whole thing up.
Also just a wedge graft, but in the hypocotyl instead of in the epicotyl.
Yes. So what we're going to do is the method that I learned in Thailand for hypocotyl grafting. And all the trees in my fields that are zybothinus, with the exception of 2, are hypocotyl grafted trees from Thailand. And this methodology is good because you can graft with a very, very young seedling that has just barely putting out the epicotyl and the leaves. Okay, so as far as production-wise go, even though it takes a lot more material, okay, you can still have a lot of seedlings when the time is right and go ahead and graft them and getting them moving. Because one factor is in all the grafting and budding is the time of the year. Now, since in Thailand, for instance, you're in the wet season when the durians are starting to come, May, June, that's the beginning of the wet season, then if you can do your grafting sort of during that season when the humidity's high, then you're probably in a much better place than, let's say, November in Thailand, where it's very, very dry, it's hot, or cool as the case may be according to where you're at, and it's not conducive. Those conditions are not as conducive to grafting because we're trying to keep humidities up and keeping the same environment that the plant is at, at the time. So basically what hypocotyl grafting is this is the hypocotyl and this is the stem or the epicotyl. And your cotyledons and root are below, and they have produced enough energy in the cotyledons to produce this nice stem. And so most of this growth early on comes from the reserves in the hypocotyl, in the cotyledons. So this is what we start out with. Now, in selecting what plants are best, if you had 500 seedlings, you would be looking for things that are large and have a nice straight column. See, this one here, if you look at it at different angles, you can see some straightness, you can see curves, and so forth. So there's a secret to when you're germinating these, that you get them so that your hypocotyl wants to grow straight. And of course, you don't want it in a shady spot where the sun's on this side, where it's going to lean, so forth. I mean, you want uniform light so that you get as straight a hypocotyl as you can, because the straighter, the easier it is, to do your grafting on it. Because you want to have your cut in a part of the stem that is straight. It's just as if you look at the Scion material, if you look at it in this direction, you have a little bit of a curve, and if you go to there, it looks pretty straight. If you go here, you really got a curve. So you wouldn't want to make your cut on the curved side. You want it on the back and front side of your straightest area. And that's the same way here, because you got to replicate this and this together. So you want to look at the thing to where you find the straightest column. And in this right here, if you look, this is the straightest column. So if I'm going to cut this and put my Scion in, of course my Scion I want to take and cut on the straightest side, on both sides, and the same with this. I definitely wouldn't want to use this, because right down here, when I put my Scion in, it might not match up as well. Another thing to look at is the diameter of the hypocotyl. Of course, you have a lot greater diameter here than you do up here. So you have to sort of match all this up because you want them to fit together like a hand and a glove. Of course, that technique, hand and glove, doesn't necessarily work with grafting, but you try the best that you can. So we've gotten the Scion wood out of the field. This is only a demonstration. This might or might not be the best that we could use, but once again, what we would be doing is using two different knives to do this. One, the grafting knife to do the Scion, and then we'd use a little homemade jury rig. It's just a straight razor, okay, that this one's could be sharper, but it's had a lot of use. And this is what we're going to slit the Hypocotyl down with. You got to have enough distance on the thing, because when you go down, let's say 5-10 centimeters, whatever it takes, or more, obviously, you need to have the Scion to come. You need to go down so it can come right through, so you're not, breaking it. You could cut it sideways like that and have it come up this way, but it's better when you're doing it to go down your nice straight part. And so this gives you a little bit of a handle to do it. So you could devise any number of things. We've used X-Acto knives, any number of other things. We've used these little things too. That's like a little X-Acto knife, but it's not very big. So, but there's something like that. Razor blade works good because it's very thin and narrow, and another thing is it has an edge on both sides. You don't want to cut this with a grafting knife because it's going to want to go one way or the other according to whether it's right-handed or left-handed. So you want to have something that has a edge on both sides. Okay, so our process here is a matter of finding where we want to graft into the straightest part, which appears to be right here. And we don't want to do it on this side necessarily by any means, but so if we look at the back side here too, you've got a bit of a curve. So that's not going to matter. It won't come into effect because you're cutting laterally down here. So the first thing we want to do is either prepare the Scion and have it ready, which takes a little bit longer maybe and is more critical than this, because if we cut this first, then that's fine because you've got all the moisture coming up. Any delay no delay is preferable. So whoop whoop and bam, and then you wrap it up. So you need to get all your materials ready. And of course, a guy that's doing this a lot he's going to have everything ready, hundreds of seedlings, lots of Scion material, and so forth. So the other parts that you need, now there's a number of ways that once we do the cut and stuff that we can wrap it up. Okay, so there's a number of things that we need. Either some type of tape. Okay, these are different kinds of tape that we use for different things. You want something that's stretchy, and a lot of people use 3M, which I might or might not have because I don't normally use it. It's a 3M stretchy kind of stuff to wrap up their Scion.
Like parafilm?
Yeah, it's parafilm is what it is. But I don't normally use that. I use grafting rubbers, okay? Because my experience with grafting goes back to as a freshman in college in forestry, grafting pine trees, okay? If you believe that. So we use grafting rubbers for pine trees, and this is what I use for all my grafting. Budding is a different story. You need to use films for grafting to keep all the moisture in. For budding, we're going to use this as the thing to hold it because it's nice and uniform and you can wrap it easy, okay, because you got a stem that you got to wrap. Whereas 3M will work also. The what did you call it?
Parafilm?
Parafilm will work also, but not something I normally use.
For some reason, I'm surprised that people graft pine trees.
Well, yeah, we were doing research, and it was necessary to graft good select Christmas trees onto other rootstock.
Oh, okay.
So this is what we're going to do now. You can stop it for just a second because we got to get I can use this baggie actually. Grafting wax, but we don't need that. I'll use this.
So will you set out the things you need, and I'll take a picture of them, like is that everything you need right there?
Yeah, afterwards we can do that.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay, so what we'll first do is get this Scion halfway prepared to see where we want to make the cut on it. And of course you got these two are not very good buds, that's not much. So we want to deal with the top portion of it. But here we've got two. I would prefer to have this as the final wedge, the final Scion, but we got a problem here with nodes, so we might have to make it a little bit longer. But in order to make our cut, we need to get rid of, we want to make just the cut where it's nice and straight and without these things, so we'll have to get rid of the bottom portion first. And of course this is always a problem, so we need to get rid of those the best we can. And of course that damaged that a little bit by doing it, so we just cut it off again. Sometimes you'll do more cutting than you want to do just to get the right surface. Now again, we want to have a straight edge. We don't want to do that because it's going to be curved, so this is probably as straight as we can get. So the fact that this is only a practice thing, then it's not important whether we do that first or this first. We'll do this first and then see if we get a good wedge, and then we can go and make our cut here. So now I wouldn't normally have a Scion that has the hard part here, your petiole, because that's going to be harder to cut through, and you want as clean a cut as possible. So there we've got a nice clean cut. Now, in fact, you could use this also in another grafting method, just by grafting it on the side and making a small cut in the back, and you could actually graft it onto one of your others.
That's called cleft grafting, is that right?
Yeah, that's one of the names for it. So, and then here we're going to have to do the same thing. And of course, the fact that that's now, let's say this is the wedge that you want. I would like to have it a little bit longer, but because we didn't have much distance in between, we have a short wedge. But some important things is you want to try to have it as even as possible. And if you look at it, it's pretty symmetrical all the way around. Okay, so your wedge is about the same angle. Not that that's very critical. The important thing is that the cambial layer here is not damaged, that you have a good cut. So, but you see here the cambium on this side is very thin and thicker here. So that's something to notice, because when you slide it in here, this might be bigger than the Scion. So you'll want to have at least one side lined up. And if the other side isn't, well, that's the breaks of the game. But at least one side lined up, and that will be the side that's more critical. Now, normally we would like to have a little bit sharper wedge here, but we had to cut that off. And to go back and redo this, you're only going to damage it. So the next step then would be, of course, keeping this moist the best we could, and do it pretty quick. So all we're going to do is we're just going to cut the epicotyl off, okay? Now, you could cut off a little bit deeper if you want down, but that's not going to be necessary. So once again, we want to find our straightest line so that this will match up with that. And if we get too off, it's not going to match. So probably right here, so that when we make the cut, all we're doing is slitting down and then sliding this in. So you look at it from the top, and you want to get,
Can you see from that angle of it?
you want to get centered on top of it and keep yourself out of the shadow. And then basically you're very slowly working this down so that it doesn't split too much on its own to the depth of your Scion. And the less back and forth you do, the better. So eventually then you've got the depth of the Scion, the cut in the Scion. So now we're going to basically just slide that little puppy down into there, and so that at least one side, and we have the thick side matching up on here. Now if you look at the other side, the Scion's not quite as big as the diameter of this Hypocotyl. So here some is matched up and some isn't on the other side. But that's basically what we have. Now, so we've got, you know, buds up here, bud here, at least two there that can possibly take. So the next step is the hard one, because people don't use grafting rubbers because they're not used to handling them, because you got to have long thumbnails to do the wrapping and et cetera, et cetera. So, and this is why this kind of thing is not good, because see, I have to get down in here now. If this was up, when we cut this rim off earlier, should have cut it even further down. And that's why you pot those at the top of the level, as I mentioned. Mm-hmm. Okay, so all you're doing is getting your grafting rubber started down, and it's a continuous movement, overlap, all the way up, and you know, you're keeping uniform pressure. And you have to hold the whole stem, because you know you've got a very small seedling. And then the final wrap is a matter of just getting it around thumbnail and getting it back under. Okay, so there you have it, holding it together. Okay, just that's not going to keep the moisture in or anything else, but that's going to keep the two pieces together so that they can knit, and on the cambium they can knit and such. Okay, and the grafting rubbers are good because they have a uniform pressure if you keep wrapping them at the same. 3M material, this other stuff, a little bit more difficult to handle. So how do we then keep the moisture in and everything? Well, there's a number of ways to do this. First of all, we're high humidity here, and because it's that time of the year. But there's a number of ways of doing. Grafting wax can be used if you had it or wanted to use it, and it could be applied right around this open edge right here. Okay, but in lieu of grafting wax, which most people don't use, we can take just strips of plastic and start to wrap this up so that majority of it is covered and it keeps a lot of moisture in. Now, if it's nice and rainy, okay, then we don't really have too much of a problem. And so you're doing the same thing as with the grafting rubber, and just so that's basically it. Now, once again, you've got an open surface here that you could put grafting wax, but overall the easier solution to all this is we just use a bag over the whole thing, and then we can just Ziploc or whatever, and we can just basically seal the bottom here.
And if you do that, do you need to wrap the plastic around it, or can you just put the Ziploc
It's
on?
according to a lot of factors, none of which I can give you an answer to.
Okay.
But humidity is the key thing.
Right.
If your nursery's shaded, you get good humidity, no wind, maybe you don't need this. And this is, once you've done this process, then you have to keep a very good eye on it.
Okay.
Because these can easily rot. So if you got a higher humidity, you don't want to keep too much moisture in here. So sands the bag. And then if you were only doing this, of course, then you definitely want to seal your tip, you know, with grafting wax or something else. Okay. Now, when you're doing things like citrus or mango and so forth, they're not as succulent. They don't, even though we do the same things, they're much hardier than a piece of durian Scion wood. So the more you can do. Now, if you use a bag, you know, extra and so forth, as things start to progress, you can always come to the bag and cut a few slits in it so that you get more breathing, you know, in the thing. And then eventually, if you get a bud to come out, one of these is coming out, then you just can take the bag off. But this is very critical, and if it's coming out, you take the bag off, you might have just killed it. So it has more tolerance to humidity and moisture than it does to dryness. So keep it on the wet side more than on the dry side would be,
Okay.
you know, because I have killed them by taking the bags off too early. So,
You were just checking on them, and then that was it.
yeah, it just
Wow.
getting too antsy, trying to do things too quickly. So
How many weeks does it usually take?
that's
Very variable.
it's
Yeah.
I can't even begin to say, except for if they haven't succeeded after 6 weeks, they're going to start to rot. I mean, if they haven't formed a union, then if you took this off and went to the tip will die back first, and it'll start dying back.
Right.
Okay, but it might stop. Okay, and then you've got a bud that's coming out. So you just have to take a look and see if it looks like it did when you took the Scion wood and grafted it. If
Right.
it does, then it's still alive, and it's probably trying to make a union.
Okay.
Because after a certain period of time, if there's no union occurring, this little bud stick or this little Scion material is just going to dry up and die.
Okay.
Okay. So I mean, it doesn't take very long to see whether or not you've got a good take. You know,
Yeah,
a few
they-
weeks maybe.
I did mangoes the other day, and they told me 10 days. Maybe that's faster than durian.
No, that's I wouldn't. Well,
It's too soon.
that's
10
a
days.
personal kind of thing. But
Yeah.
anyway,
Cool. Cool. So just a wedge graft, but in the hypocotyl instead of in the epicotyl.
yes.